sees the memes of production, and the like and subscribe button.
Unfortunately, the first thing that we're covering is quite bad, and the thing that follows it up is honestly not that much better. Hello, AP News. Hello, front page title. Supreme Court sides with Trump administration on mail voting restrictions ahead of midterms. Yeah, it's actually pretty bad. Sorry, folks. This is the #1 Republican plan to steal the midterms, and the Supreme Court just gave them the go-ahead. It's not great. It's actually bad enough that MSNBC is acknowledging Supreme Court bias. You know what I mean? Like, even liberal institutions tend to talk about the Supreme Court as though they're actually motivated by jurisprudence and legal analysis. But here MSNBC says, breaking, Trump-aligned Supreme Court hands Trump shocking voter suppression win. It's actually pretty bad.
Got to get to some breaking news now out of Washington here from the Supreme Court, actually, with justices saying they're going to let President Trump's executive order on mail-in balloting go into effect while a bigger court fight plays out. Remember, that order, which was signed months ago now, back in March, pushes the Postal Service to put in place a new rule that has states provide a list of eligible voters 60 days before any federal election. Calendar check, midterms are 71 days from today. Let me bring in Ryan Riley, who's joining us now. Zero jargon, practically speaking, what does this actually mean?
I don't think we quite yet know.
I love that answer. At least honest. It's honest.
The decision itself says that, this is not our final decision on this matter,
Okay.
but the calendar, I think, is so essential to what you're talking about.
The midterms are in like 2 months. Basically, the Republicans on the Supreme Court threw their hands up in the air, and rather than making a ruling based on the legal validity of the executive order, which there is no legal validity, it's unconstitutional. What they essentially said was that the 20 plus states that sued the Trump administration over the executive order do not have legal standing to do so because the order hasn't actually taken effect yet, meaning that they have no legal grounds to sue because there are no damages. It's insane. It's essentially like, actually, no law is ever unconstitutional until it takes effect. Like the executive order, like declaring the of all non-whites would, by this Supreme Court's ruling, not be unconstitutional at face because it needs to have happened first in order for, like, literally, we can't stop a murderer because the murder hasn't happened yet. I mean, that's the argument they're making here. Because it hasn't been implemented, the states don't have damages to point to. It's essentially the Republicans in the court throwing their hands up in the air and going, we know it's unconstitutional. Let's just watch it play out. Of course, they waited until as close as possible to the midterms taking place to throw this ruling out there to basically guarantee that Trump's going to be able to get away with it.
Because this is just a really expedited schedule for them to make any changes before these midterms, which are 71 days away. And so what this allowed them to do was move forward with like aspects of it's basically proposing these rules, right? So they've now proposed these rules in the Federal Register, but we really don't know how this will ultimately play out. This is not the final word from the Supreme Court.
Yeah, it's not the final word because they're not even ruling on its constitutionality. They're basically saying that murder's illegal, but the person trying to murder you hasn't actually murdered you yet. So, like, who's to say, Look, we'll go to the SCOTUS blog on this one because it's really quite important and we don't want to miss anything here. The Supreme Court on Monday afternoon cleared the way for the Trump admin to begin implementing an executive order signed by Trump earlier this year that imposes restrictions on mail-in voting. The court has paused an injunction by a federal judge in Boston that had barred the federal government from applying provisions of that executive order in the November election to 23 states, along with D.C., challenging their legality. A separate ruling by the same judge in a case filed by a different set of plaintiffs temporarily prohibits the U.S. Postal Service from implementing one provision of the executive order anywhere in the U.S. That ruling remains in effect, at least for now. In its 10-page, unsigned opinion, because of course none of them want to put their name to this, the majority said it was too soon for courts to consider the state's challenges because the order has not yet been carried out, which means the states have not suffered the kind of injury that allows their lawsuit to move forward. The court's 3 Democratic appointees dissented, not surprising. In a 23-page opinion, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson accused the majority of taking its eye off the ball and thus missing the government's actual objective to secure our imprimatur for its effort to foment chaos ahead of the November elections. Trump signed the executive order at the center of the dispute in March. As it came to the court in late July, the focus of the case was on 3 different provisions of the order. The first instructs the Department of Homeland Security to create lists of the adult U.S. citizens in each state and send those lists to states at least 60 days before a federal election. The second provision commands the U.S. Attorney General to, quote, prioritize the investigation and, as appropriate, prosecution of state and local officials who issue federal ballots to individuals not eligible to vote in a federal election. So essentially, what the executive order is doing is saying, the federal government will create its own list of who is allowed to vote. And if you provide ballots to people who are not on that list, the DOJ is going to come after you. They're going to come after officials in the state for providing those ballots. Now, obviously, voter registration constitutionally is delegated to the states. The idea that the federal government can tell states who they can and cannot make eligible to vote and then prosecute people who don't follow those rules is completely unconstitutional, completely unambiguously, overwhelmingly unconstitutional. Again, it's like the birthright citizenship. It's literally right there. It's right there in the writing. There's no if, ands, or buts about this. The third provision requires states to give the U.S. Postal Service a list of voters to whom the states intend to send mail ballots, and it prohibits the USPS, please listen, prohibits the U.S. Postal Service from mailing ballots to voters who are not on the list of enrolled voters the USPS will create. Or in other words, the federal government decides for each state who is or isn't eligible to vote, and not only will the DOJ prosecute state officials who provide ballots to people not on that list, but in addition, they are prohibiting the Postal Service from mailing ballots to people not on that list. So if you could just imagine for a moment all of the mistakes the federal government could make in deciding who is or isn't eligible to vote in the midterms. Keep in mind, this is a list created by the Trump administration, unambiguously the federal government. It is the federal government making this list. The Trump administration gets to decide who can and can't vote. Can you imagine what they're going to do? People aren't even going to get these lists of federally approved voters per state until right before the election happens. People aren't even going to know whether or not they're, according to the federal government, eligible to vote. It's really, really possible the federal government just blacks out massive swaths of the voter rolls for largely Democrat-aligned areas and just prevents the USPS from mailing ballots to them. A group of 23 states, led by California and the NDC, challenged the government's implementation of the order in a federal court in Massachusetts. They argued the executive order conflicts with the Constitution that gives states the power to determine voter eligibility. Obviously, blatantly unconstitutional. We can just vote in person, right? Yes. But the point is they're going to use this as a legal pretext to keep USPS from mailing ballots to potentially millions of people who normally vote through mail-in. They're not blocking mail-in voting generally. They are going to create federal lists that will, for some reason, not include Democrat-aligned voters, at least some of them. Keep in mind, they would only have to do this to a small number of people in most swing states to make a real difference. These are the midterms. We're not talking about a presidential election. We're talking about thousands of elections all across the country where if you're smart and you know which areas to block out or which areas to make mistakes in, you can potentially annihilate Democrats' chances in specific areas. U.S. District Judge Indira Talwani ruled she could not review the challengers' claims as they applied to federal elections scheduled after November 3rd, 2026, because those claims were not yet ripe. That is, ready for review. However, she said she could review the challengers' claims with regard to the upcoming midterm elections because the order, quote, created a direct and immediate dilemma for them, and she prohibited the federal government from implementing the challenge restrictions on or before November 3rd. And the Supreme Court just overturned that. Excuse me. God. You mentioned this might fuck them up as well? No. It's the Save America Act that could have fucked up the Republicans. This is exclusively going to be used to fuck over Democrats. The federal government is going to use this to essentially strong-arm the USPS into not sending ballots into predictably Democrat-aligned households. It's very, very bad. The Supreme Court is openly enabling blatantly unconstitutional, I mean, just beyond the pale. The challengers countered on August 3rd that putting Talwani's injunction on hold would allow the federal government to rush out an unprecedented, legally indefensible voter verification and ballot interception program that would, among other things, give the U.S. Postal Service, run by Trump, far-reaching new powers and responsibilities. They also emphasized that the First Circuit had agreed with them that, quote, the specificity of the executive order stated timelines and the inescapable legal requirements and impending deadlines the states currently face in facilitating mail-in and absentee balloting for immediately upcoming elections together establish the kind of concrete injury that allows them to sue. 3 weeks later, the Trump administration urged conservative Supreme Court justices to step in, this time citing the imminent publication of a new U.S. Postal Service rule, Sauer said, imposes only modest requirements for preparation envelope design for federal ballot mail. So, like, this is very, very unambiguously the Republicans' last effort to try not to lose the midterms too badly. Everyone knows the Republicans are going to lose at the very least the House. This is just desperate. Like, democracy doesn't matter. Nothing matters. The pretense doesn't matter. Faking it doesn't matter anymore. Just do anything. The conservatives in the Supreme Court didn't even bother to, like, make a legal justification for this. They literally just said, well, it hasn't happened yet. How can you know if something illegal is illegal until the illegal thing has happened? How do you even know that murder is illegal until after the murder has happened? The Supreme Court is a completely illegitimate institution, and the conservatives on it are traitors to the Republic. I'm really sorry. Like the birthright citizenship ruling, there are wrong answers. If anyone in any normal job did this badly at their job, they would end up in jail. There are wrong answers. The idea that you can just maliciously misinterpret the Constitution to favor your party over and over and over and over and over again, constantly, just very unambiguous. There's no room for interpretation here. Just continuously do this and face no consequences for it is absolutely ridiculous. Stop asking me these stupid questions. There's always to. In a unsigned order too, man. Jesus Christ. The majority, that is the conservatives on the court, found the government would suffer irreparable harm. The Trump administration would suffer irreparable harm if Talwani's order was not paused now. Even if that ruling were eventually reversed, the majority emphasized it would come too late for the 2026 midterms. Like, they are directly saying the point of this is to influence the midterms. The point of this is to have it be run out right before the midterms. That is the goal. These people hold you in this country in contempt. They despise you. They hate you. They absolutely despise you. This is it.
Hi again, everyone. It is 5 o'clock here in New York. I'm Alicia Menendez, in for Nicole Wallace. We begin this hour with big breaking news out of the United States Supreme Court, which has just granted Donald Trump a win in his fight to take control over our elections. Today's ruling is about Trump's executive order that would restrict mail-in voting. The highest.
I know this is really bad, but did most people vote in person before 2020 anyway? No. Stop. We're not. Listen, millions and millions of people vote by mail. The federal government getting to implement an unconstitutional second-order voter checklist and denying USPS the ability to send ballots to people not in that list could literally win Republicans, potentially, I'm not saying they're going to do it this extreme, but could potentially win them hundreds of federal elections. Hundreds of them. We're talking they would only need to tip the scale slightly in many, many areas. Think of how many elections are won by margins of less than 10 points. We're talking about pretty small margins in a lot of cases here. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. I'm not going to do any silver lining bullshit. This isn't like the Save America Act, which was more of a Trump fixation thing. This is the effort to steal the election, and the Supreme Court just gave it a go-ahead. Now, the exact extent to which the Trump administration will be able to create a maliciously inaccurate, federally approved voter list, I don't know. I don't know how much of a chilling effect the threat of legal prosecution from the Department of Justice against state officials who provide ballots to people not on that list will be. I do not know how much of an effect that will have, but there is no silver lining here. It's just really, really bad.
Court has granted the administration's request for a stay, which means that the injunction previously placed on Trump's executive order is lifted while the appeals process goes through. The unsigned order from the Supreme Court means that the Trump administration can move forward to create citizenship lists and only send mail ballots to those on the federal list. Because it is unsigned, we do not know exactly how the justices voted, but there are dissents from the 3 liberal justices. And that is where we begin this hour.
Yeah, we don't know who voted which way because the conservatives were too ashamed to sign their opinion. But the 3 liberals dissented, and there were 6 votes in favor of the majority. So you can do the math. We're all wondering who did this.
Friends co-founder and executive director of Protect Democracy, Ian Basson, is here. Andrew Weissman is back with us. Plus, with me at the table, Princeton University professor and political analyst Eddie Glaude, and our senior legal reporter, Lisa Rubin. Lisa, talk me through this.
So, Alicia, somebody just asked me at our network, is this the sort of thing that I should be really concerned with, or is this not that big of a deal? And I would submit to you and them, this is a really big deal. What the states who litigated this case were trying to do was prevent...
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. There's no... I don't have like a... Well, thankfully, the Republicans are... So they're going to bunk this one up message to follow this one up with. It's just really, really bad. It's effectively the Supreme Court aiding and abetting a coup in this midterm. A deliberate attempt at nationwide electoral interference through a blatantly unconstitutional, illegal method.
The implementation of an executive order that Trump issued in 2026, presumably directed at election integrity. But it had a number of different provisions that the state said would fundamentally alter the way that they conducted their elections. Let me tell you about 2 of them. One permits the Department of Homeland Security to distribute to states state citizenship lists. In other words, to check against their voter rolls.
The same people who send ICE into your town now have the ability to decide who is or isn't eligible to vote in your state.
Lists of citizens. The Supreme Court today says there's nothing wrong with that because it's compelling the state to do nothing. But of course, in the hands of states that want to participate in, that want to enforce this administration's immigration-related agenda, these citizenship lists can be a dangerous tool. We already know that, for example, the kinds of citizenship lists that they have compiled in the hands of certain states have led them to say to people, including Homeland Security investigations, you have as many as, let's say, 15,000 people in your states whose names appear in our records of people who are not citizens. The names of those people are on your voter rolls. Those people should be disqualified from voting. And in most cases, those are false positives simply because of the overlap of names. That's one. One of the other things that this does is direct the Postal Service to initiate a rulemaking process to limit who can get a mail-in ballot. The Supreme Court today, in this opinion, the per curiam opinion, is saying the executive order doesn't force the USPS to do anything other than start a rulemaking process. That rulemaking process was only proposed by the president. The president is putting it in USPS's hands to decide what to do. And it doesn't compel the...
I really don't know how aggressive they're going to be in leaving people off of the federally approved voter list. I don't know how many ballots are going to be sent out. I really have no idea. This does have the potential to, this has the potential to win them the midterms. You know, it really depends on how, across the breadth of Texas, the Democrats could lose a dozen seats in Texas purely on marginal, ballot purges. How much can Trump control the USPS's ability to send out ballots? 100%. The USPS is federal. The USPS is completely controlled. The Postmaster General is a Trump toady. Talarico just lost effectively. Anyone could lose. We could lose in Maine. We could lose in Michigan. It's we're talking any even remotely holy doomerism. It's not doomerism. I don't know what to tell you. Okay. When Hitler signs the Enabling Act, it's not doomerism to point. It's happening. I don't know what to tell you.
States to do anything. That ignores the reality of where we are. Last week, the USPS, meaning the United States Postal Service, finalized a rule that would compel states to send to the United States Postal Service a list of those voters who are eligible to vote by mail.
Blue states should not send out any ballots then? It's the USPS that mails ballots. The USPS mails ballots. The federal USPS.
60 days in advance of the November election. And then only those people who are on the list can get a mail-in ballot from the United States Postal Service. It is putting an artificial constraint on who can vote by mail. And of course, it puts...
No states mail them out via the USPS. Oh, you're suggesting that the states just like flat out not mail it to anyone? Like they change their own rules? There's no time for that. I understand what you're getting at here, but for one, that wouldn't help us in red states. And for two, there's no time. It's 71 days until the midterms. There's no time to do this like whiplash, out of left field Democrat effort to just prevent anyone from getting that. There's no time.
The states in somewhat of an untenable position. They have to decide, are we going to comply with this order? And if we do, our folks can vote by mail. But if we don't, are we basically setting ourselves up for a showdown with the federal government over mail-in balloting altogether? You've already seen some states say, we have no intention of complying with this. What does that mean then for the delivery of mail-in ballots when the United States Postal Service, as flawed as it might be, is still the only postal service that we have?
Ian Bassan, as Lisa Rubin was making her way in quite a hurry to this set, she said to me, listen, the analysis here is a hyper-technical argument about what the EO itself requires.
It's not even a technical argument. It's like a technical non-argument. It's insane. It's unprecedented.
And the technocratic elements of it are kind of the point, which is they want us to get lost in the sauce. So just zoom out for me. What does the decision today from the Supreme Court mean for our democracy and for our elections?
Well, I want to agree with Lisa that it's a big deal because the Supreme Court, I think, is giving way too much running room to an administration that has signaled over and over again that it doesn't believe that elections should be in the hands of the voters and disagrees fundamentally with the founders' design that elections should be kept far from the person sitting in the Oval Office and should be run by the states and localities. And President Trump continues to try to seize that power for himself in the executive. And I think the Supreme Court giving any room to that at all is deeply disturbing. But I think the other thing to keep in mind here about where there is some saving grace here, and let's all just acknowledge the decision, as far as I know, came out about 15 minutes ago. It's 37 pages. We're all quickly digesting it. But here's something important to know. The decision stays an injunction in one of...
Can't wait for liberals to do nothing about this. As we'll see soon, right now, the liberals have their hands full denouncing Hassan Piker for whatever reason. So don't worry, the Democrats are on it. No, yeah, you can't. It's like I've said, the ability for Democrats to do anything about the decay of our country stops fundamentally at acknowledging the fact that the institutions are rotten. They can't do it. Democrats can be trusted to say Trump bad. They can point out that the Trump administration is doing a bad job waging the war with Iran or whatever else. But this is very fundamental. This is just a straightforward, like, the Supreme Court is, at least its majority, full of traitors who are aiding and abetting the eradication of our Constitution for the purpose of stealing an election. It is genuinely, what just happened is like 2000 Bush v. Gore, but 1,000 times worse. Like, the Supreme Court ruling on Bush v. Gore in 2000 was legitimately very, very marginal, hinging on a couple thousand votes. This is nationwide, potentially millions of votes. Like, this is much like how this administration does Watergate like every other day, more than every other day. Like, this is so far beyond that. Just
several cases that were pending against the president's executive order and attempt to get the United States Postal Service to block mail-in ballots. There is another injunction out of the District of Massachusetts in a case brought by the League of Women Voters that is left untouched, and as far as I can tell in a quick skim of this opinion, is not being put on hold by the Supreme Court. And that's potentially interesting because I believe that the Department of Justice wanted the Supreme Court to basically freeze that injunction as well. And the fact that the Supreme Court has not done that here and that injunction remains in place could be an interesting tell about whether the Supreme Court is splitting babies here. The other thing I think that's important here, as the three liberal justices pointed out in their dissent, is there's nothing in this opinion, this order from the Supreme Court, that gets at the merits of the constitutional and other challenges that have been.
Yeah, of course not. Obviously not. Yeah, I'm sorry. There's just not much of a way to spin this one, guys.
Garrett Hake is at the White House tonight, and Garrett, the mail-in ballot win for the president could be short-lived.
That's right, Tom. There are more legal challenges sure to come here, but tonight a divided court is allowing the administration to order the Postal Service to only deliver mail-in ballots to those on federal lists of eligible voters, all as the White House ramps up its economic pressure on Iran.
Tonight, as the war with Iran approaches the 6-month mark, the Trump administration rolling out a new...
Whatever. All polls say blue wave. If they steal it that obviously, there could be pushback. Let's be real here. What pushback? The president is an open... Gas prices have skyrocketed. Grocery prices have skyrocketed. We're in another perma war in the Middle East. And every day he does 57 illegal things. What pushback? At least the oil economy will collapse. Yeah, that's the like the one saving grace here is that industrial civilization is still on the precipice of... Wasn't there a major international airport on the East Coast that actually ran out of gas? Airplane fuel. Yesterday? Which one was it? They had to get it from some other airport. Yeah, Buffalo. Yup. Don't forget the Treasury trying to manipulate the bond market. Yeah. You mean Bessent saying that he would potentially deploy as much as $1 trillion from the Treasury's discretionary spending to buy up the bond market? Yeah, it's not oh, it's not great. It's not great. Anyway, yeah. Sorry, there's just not much analysis to be had here. Vote in person, I guess. Vote in person.